Coming up right now is the Space Show.
This is your community radio station, 88.3 Southern FM.
On September the 24th last year, at the Johnson Space Centre, the 4 crew members of the Artemis II mission were gathered together. Now, they are going to be rocketed by the SLS, the Space Launch System, big rocket, on a trajectory first around the Earth and then out around behind the Moon and back to Earth again. So, let's meet the crew. This event was held at the Johnson Space Centre, as I said, on September the 24th.
Good morning and welcome to NASA's Johnson Space Center for our Artemis II Crew News Conference. We're joined today by Artemis II Commander Reed Wiseman, Pilot Victor Glover, Mission Specialist Christina Cook, and Mission Specialist Jeremy Hansen of the Canadian Space Agency. But before we get started, we'll kick it off with some opening remarks from our crew. Reed, take it away.
All right, thanks, Courtney, and thanks to everyone for being here and watching online. Victor, Christina, Jeremy, we're going to the moon. It has been an amazing journey the last 2.5 years, and we really see the light at the end of the tunnel. This is a test mission, and it was highlighted up there. I know this week NASA has said that we're going to open the launch window in early February, and we just do not anchor on dates. We are going to launch when this vehicle is ready, when this team is ready, and we are going to go execute this mission to the best of our abilities. When we get off the planet, we might come right back home. We might spend 3 or 4 days around Earth. We might go to the moon. That's where we want to go, but it is a test mission, and we are ready for every scenario as we ride this amazing space launch system and the Orion spacecraft 250,000 miles away. It's going to be amazing. So what have we been doing the last 2.5 years? I feel like we've gotten to know a lot of you in the audience. You've gotten to know us. We really have crisscrossed the United States of America. We've been out west. We've been out east. We've been in the Midwest. We've been here in Houston. We've been overseas. We went over to Germany to see where the European Service Module is manufactured. We went to Iceland and did geology training where the Apollo crews trained for their historic missions to the moon. We've been up to Canada to pay homage to our friends up north. We have been all over, and everywhere we go, there is unbelievable excitement. I wish we could take you all with us so you could see the excitement that is out there. It is palpable. While we have been doing that, 2 things have really come into focus. First, the first time we saw our boosters was out in Utah, and they were just segments getting loaded onto a rail car to get shipped down to Kennedy Space Center. Jeremy and I were at Michoud when our core stage rolled out, got put onto a barge, and floated over to Kennedy Space Center. And last, 2 weeks ago, we were at Kennedy, and there was the Orion spacecraft getting enshrouded in the launch abort system in the facility called the LASIF. Over in the vehicle assembly building, there's our core stage. The boosters are all assembled. They're strapped on the side of the Boeing core stage, and the United Launch Alliance interim cryogenic propulsion stage has made it to the top. And you can go up to the 274-foot level where the crew access arm is in the White Room. We were just there, and you can look down on this behemoth beneath you and just think, I think that it's already 3.5 million pounds. It's unfueled sitting on that pad right now, and it's not even fully assembled, but it is so close. So you can see all this hardware, all these elements are there, and it's just waiting for its crew and its launch team to get us off of Kennedy. The second thing that you see, though, when you go around is what really matters the most to us. It is the people that are putting this thing together. When you walk in the vehicle assembly building and you see these young men and women, these are the people you want building your rocket. They're covered in tattoos. They're wearing hard hats. They've got huge harnesses on. They're getting roped in, going up to unimaginable heights, putting their lives at risk, putting themselves in danger, and they're doing it with a calm confidence every single day. And those are the people that you leave in awe of. They have the courage to stop an evolution if it is unsafe. They even stopped us when we were in Utah and we were carrying on like 4 children looking at these boosters, and they came over and said, please quiet down. We have a critical lift in progress over here. They have the courage to do the right thing. And it has been amazing. We get to see the American public. We get to see all of our international partners. Getting to know these people is incredible. And then the last thing that we've gotten to do is we have just built a tremendous amount of trust between the 4 of us and between our leadership, who we interact with every day. Our commercial partner leadership and our NASA agency leadership. It is a fine organization, and we are proud to be a part of it. We were in a sim yesterday, Victor and I, And we had a failure, quick anecdote. We had a failure, and I read the whole failure, but I read one number wrong. I said IMU 3 failed, and our instructor behind us was like, it's IMU 2, it's IMU 2. And Victor turns around and goes, I knew what he meant. It was IMU 2. And I was like, it's so great. We don't even have to talk. We know exactly what we're all thinking. So this crew cohesion, we're at the point now where we are ready to go fly. And with that, I will hand it over to my friend Victor.
Oh, man. I don't want to say anything else. I'm ready to go into questions. That was great. Well said, well said. So, you've had the mission overview briefings, and thank you for being here for this multi-day slog and allowing us to share what we're privileged to do with the public. So, the mission is 10 days, 9-point-something days, and we're going to go fly by the moon on the sixth day. I just want to share with you a little bit about the first day. And so here's a picture of the timeline, and I know that that's too small for it to be really useful to you, but I'm just going to keep holding this up here because you can at least tell that there's a bunch of different colored lines on this chart, and I'm going to talk about a few of them. And the first one is that we actually start the day that we launch 7 hours before launch, waking up in crew quarters to get medical checks and a weather brief and to work with our team to start making sure that we're ready to go out to the launch. And when the Exploration Ground Systems team and the team in Launch Control says that things are looking good and send their crew, we'll drive out to the pad. And so 3 to 4 hours prior, we'll start to ingress the vehicle. And then he talked about the stack weighing about 3.5 million pounds. When it's all fueled up, it'll be about 5.5 million pounds, but 8.8 million pounds of thrust at sea level. Mass flow is going to rocket us towards space. And about 9 minutes after that, we'll be in space. And then the day gets even busier. Now, we've been up for almost a full work day at this point. And so once we get to space, the ascent portion really ends after about a half an orbit when we're going to go from a 1,200 mile by 0 mile orbit to doing what we call a perigee raise maneuver that gets us into a stable and sustainable orbit. And then we're going to get a couple of us out of our seats and start to check out really critical systems, the water system and the toilet.
Very important.
Got to have a toilet to go to the moon. And so we're going to be working as a team and working with Mission Control to make sure that the vehicle is ready. And then we're going to go around the Earth in about the same amount of time that the International Space Station goes around the Earth, in 90 minutes. And once we get to that closest point to the Earth or perigee, we're going to do something called an apogee raise burn. And that apogee raise burn is going to get us going into an orbit that humans have never been in, almost 40,000 miles away from the Earth on one end. And then we'll do a perigee raise burn to get us back above 100 miles or so on the close side. But right after that apogee raise burn on the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, we're going to disconnect from that upper stage and then turn around and fly an approach to it. And we're going to fly it by hand. And we're going to make sure that the flying qualities of the Orion spacecraft are suitable for the more complex missions where we're going to dock to a lander or to the Gateway, the orbiting space station around the moon. And then once we're done with that, we're going to continue to reconfigure the cabin to make sure that it's ready for us to live and to work for the next 9 days. We're going to break down the seats. We're going to make sure the environmental control system is ready. And then we're going to monitor a few burns. And that first day, we're going to take a nap and then wake up and observe a burn in the middle of the night. We're going to go back to sleep, take another nap, wake up, and then we're going to have the lead up working very tightly with our friends here in Houston and Mission Control, leading up to trans-lunar injection. And when that team is ready and gives us the go, we're going to burn the engines and head toward the moon. And that actually happens, if you were looking at my chart, that happens on this second row right here. And that's the point where we're going to wrap that day up and actually have a normal sleep period. And so I just wanted to share with you a little bit of how busy and how many really critical things are going to happen on that first day. Some really amazing things are going to happen every day after that. And to talk a little bit more about the scientific activities that we're going to conduct, I'm going to pass it over to Christina. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Victor. I'm both super pumped and very tired, having heard all of that. But it's great to be with you this morning. And the thing I love about the moon is that it's not just a beacon for exploration and this platform of possibilities for incredible missions like this, but it has benefits. That's actually why we're racing towards it. Those benefits are really, really wide in nature. You have everything from innovation, technology development, not only for future missions going deeper into the solar system and every technology that it enables those, but technologies that come back to Earth. You have industry benefits. We are going with commercial partners, and we are stronger with a strong aerospace industry doing manufacturing here in the country and building up that expertise that actually actually has a wide range of applications throughout our industrial world. You have inspiration, a whole generation of people starting this pipeline of STEM workers and manufacturers and operators that are excited to see what you can do when you work hard and you come together as a team. And then, of course, the discovery or the science. And I'm going to talk more about that because that's actually where we get to be a huge part of this mission. The science on Artemis and our mission in particular is kind of three different types. The first one is CubeSats. Our spacecraft, or the rocket itself, is actually going to be deploying some CubeSats from countries from 4 different continents. They're going to be studying things like space science, radiation, future communication systems, and some of that technology development that's so important. And the next kind of science is actually human research, science that we are participating in ourselves. There's 4 major experiments on our mission, and we're excited to be a part of all of them. One we call Archer. That one is basically something where we're learning how humans how we really get through these tough deep space exploration missions. We learn about cognition, we learn about sleep hygiene, we learn how we can maximally perform when we go on these, these environments that are so austere. Another one is called Avatar, and we are actually going to be flying with cells put into tissue chips from our own bodies to see the effects of space, the space environment on those cells. Tissue chips is an incredible technology. I had the privilege of working with them on my first ISS mission, and it was really a privilege because it represents a way to see the physicality and not just the cellular reactions of our bodies to these environments. We're doing a bioimmunity markers type of study. A fascinating thing about the space environment is that it actually changes the immune systems of our bodies, and that's really important to us and our friends. Many of us had experienced those things when we went to the ISS, and we're going to really have to have a handle on that for long-duration missions. And then finally, a mission or an experiment called Standard Measures, and this one I love because it basically encompasses everything you can possibly think about to measure about the human body and puts it in a repository. So things we haven't even thought of yet, questions we haven't even thought that we need to answer yet, and maybe methods for answering those questions that haven't even been invented yet can still be applied to all of the people that have flown in space in the future by having this repository of information. So those are some of the human research experiments we're going to be a part of. But then, of course, there's the big hitter, the lunar geology, which is actually just another way of saying solar system formation science. Learning, gaining knowledge about how these planetary systems evolve around a sun, around an energy source. We can take that information and we can apply it to other solar systems all around the universe. We have had such a fun time training for this part of the mission. Our closest approach to the moon is actually going to be scheduled. We get to take 3 full hours and devote it to nothing other than observing the lunar surface. And depending on the time that we launch, depending on the illumination of the far side of the moon, we hope it's not the dark side. We hope it's the lit far side, because that could mean that we could see parts of the moon that never have had human eyes lay upon them before. And believe it or not, human eyes are one of the best scientific instruments that we have. Our geologists are beyond excited for our eyes to look at the moon, and we've been training how to turn those observations into tangible science for them. There are incredible basins on the moon. Some of them are in this picture behind me. One, for example, Oriental Basin. It is this gem of a basin that basically is like the archetype, the Grand Canyon, solar system wide, that can tell us about solar system formation. And really, to me, what does this all boil down to? And that is answering some of the biggest questions of our time. Questions like, are we alone? We can answer that by going to Mars in the future, and this mission can be the first step in bringing that answer back to Team Humanity. And I'll turn it over to Jeremy now.
I knew I was next. I just want to talk about mission success for us, just to start there. Everything you've heard described this morning, we look through the lens of mission success, which is Artemis II getting back to the surface of the moon. And so we do all of this training, all this preparation, we're buying down all this risk, always thinking about what are we handing off to the next crew? Is what we're developing going to help them achieve that objective? That's just a really neat way to look at this. The night before, when you're going to bed, a day like this, it puts things into perspective for you. And I took a moment to kind of step back and think about, wow, what an extraordinary privilege it is to train with my fellow crewmates here to go on this mission to train alongside our backup astronauts, Andre Douglas and Jenny Gibbons from the Canadian Space Agency, who are right now working hard on getting ready for the mission while we're up here today. And of course, the broader team, the entire team that enables us to go do this. It truly is an absolute privilege. And for us, Artemis II is about much more than just going back to the moon. It is about the pursuit of excellence. And just let me speak first to our American partners. You should be extraordinarily proud of your space leadership that you have held for over half a century. You are constantly in that pursuit of excellence. You have this incredible industry and academia who is supporting and leading us back to the moon with an eye of going to Mars. And it truly is extraordinary. And then you do one more thing that great leaders do, and that is you carve out space for others to join you, to bring their talents and gifts and make a contribution. And to my fellow Canadians, you should also be extraordinarily proud that we are represented in the Artemis program. And it wasn't a gift, you earned it. For over decades now, you have responded to that call, to that opportunity with a can-do attitude, and you have used strategic investments, and you have innovated and created things like Canadarm and many other examples that have put us in this position where we can earn our place on the global stage. And that's extraordinary. That is our can-do attitude. And when I think about the four of us flying around the far side of the moon, coming around, seeing that Earth rise, taking images and video and sending them back to you, the feeling that I have inside is hope. I just imagine when that is going to be like, and we know that Artemis II is not the solution for humanity on planet Earth, but it is a contribution in the positive column. We hope that just for a moment that people will pause and say, wow, it's extraordinary when you look back upon the Earth with over 8 billion people, and you see this concrete example of what humanity can do, this extraordinary thing when we set big goals and we work together to achieve them.
At the Johnson Space Centre on September the 24th last year, that was a briefing by the 4 crew members of the Artemis II mission, due for launch in a few weeks' time. There was an opportunity for the media to ask questions, and one of them was about working in a confined space.
Hey, thanks. It's Bill Harwood, CBS News. A truly non-technical question. You know, we got to look inside the simulator in Building 9 yesterday, and some of us were thinking, okay, this isn't Gemini 7, where 2 guys spent 14 days in a vehicle the size of a Volkswagen, but it's 4 people inside a vehicle the size of maybe a minivan for 9 days. Can you just talk about the human element of living in close proximity with all that's riding on the mission, but just the physical closeness inside that cabin and how you guys are going to manage that? Thanks.
Bill, it's going to feel a lot bigger in microgravity and 3D. So I'm really counting on that.
Until Jeremy starts exercising, and then it's going to feel small again.
Yeah. You know, I think that we've been, as you guys know, we've been training together for over 2.5 years now, and with that comes a closeness that I think is built in for a reason. We are comfortable working really closely together. We actually also are committed to a system of train like you fly. And so we take opportunities to build in closeness together where we have the reality of that lack of ability to unplug, that lack of privacy when you want it the most. When we're taking that 4-hour nap at the end of a 37-hour day, that's when we're going to want to just, go to our own room and put on some headphones. But we won't have that luxury. And how do we perform maximally even in that environment? So we've done some things. We actually do long sims where we all spend the night here on Johnson Space Center. We had the opportunity to go out on a Navy ship for a recovery forces demonstration. It's called URT, Underway Recovery Test. And we opted to stay in the same stateroom, the 4 of us, and share a close space. And so we practice those things. And to be honest, we've really become a family over the last 2.5 years, and I think that's going to help a lot too. And we're also committed to mission success, that we are just ready to take those little inconveniences, but also the communication that it takes to know when someone does need a little alone time, and what are our signals for that, and how do we have both team care and self-care simultaneously to have that maximum performance. So we practice all of that, and I think we're really in a position where we're ready to put it to work.
This flight is sometimes compared to that of Apollo 8, which I think is incorrect, because Apollo 8 went to the moon, went into orbit around the moon, did 10 orbits, then thrusted out of orbit and back towards the Earth. Whereas Artemis II is going to just do a wide loop around the Earth, then out to the moon and just loop around the moon and head on back. Now, in doing that looping around the moon, it might just exceed the record set by Apollo 13. Here's what the crew said about that.
Hi, thank you so much. T.G. Mascaro with the Epoch Times. It's sounding like when y'all slingshot around the moon, you guys are going to have a chance to beat Apollo 13's record and become the crew to go farthest away from the Earth. What do you guys think about that? And can you talk a little bit more about just how you guys wrap your head around the grandeur of these numbers in terms of the distance that you guys are going to have to traverse?
When I get a question like this, I sometimes tell the story about how when I met Fred Hayes at a recent event here at JSC, he said hi, and then he said, "I heard you're going to beat our record." And it made me realize maybe he's paying attention to it more than we are. I think that sometimes when we talk about superlatives, we may inadvertently ignore the real story of what's going on in our mission. And to me, the fact that there might be a couple miles ticked more, and it does depend on when we launch, it's not guaranteed, so it's certainly not something we're chasing, but we may ignore the real story here and the real work behind what we're doing. And so I like to highlight the fact that it's not about farthest, first, fastest, longest. It's about the teamwork and the work that went into that and the dedication that it took to take on those big challenges. And I think that's really the most important thing that I can think of.
You know, there's something else about records. You know, it's interesting. Some of those records are just, going to the moon the first time. But, think about the distance record was set by Apollo 13. And that mission did not get to go to the surface. And so records are just an interesting and challenging thing. And not all of them come from, something positive. Some of them are the outcome of a not great situation. And I also want to address the other part of your question, and that was thinking about all of these grand things, the magnanimity of this mission. And actually, I'm glad you brought that up. I don't think about it. That's a distraction. If we want to live up to the standards that we owe the American and Canadian and humanity in general, we have to be able to focus and know what the next right thing is to do. And so I actually spend a lot of time clearing that out of my head so that I can focus on my job.
But we still giggle a little bit when we see it click over Mach 39 on entry. Like, we do giggle a little bit.
A little bit.
After.
I think there's something that's really good for you all to realize, too. Even if we do set that record, it won't last very long. We are up to something much, much bigger than that, and it's pretty phenomenal. And, something that all of you can do is, you can help us. We need some cheerleaders for this enterprise that is going to do this stuff. We are not just thinking about Artemis II. We are trying to figure out, how do we make this enterprise go faster? How do we evolve it? How do we iterate? If we're really going to go back and establish a permanent presence on the lunar surface and then go to Mars, this is awesome what we're doing now, but this is not the end. It gets even better from here.
So the possible dates for Artemis II are April the 1st, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and the 30th. Those are the dates that it could launch in April. The latest word from NASA is that they have replaced the helium flow problem, the valves that were giving them problems, and they're changing batteries and so on, taking the chance to update batteries, change them, recharge them or whatever, and then they'll consider a date for rollout. We haven't got a rollout date yet, let alone a launch date. Now, on the Space Show, we're going to turn back time.
Southern FM.
The sounds of the Bayside.
And this is the Space Show. On the Space Show, we're going to turn back time to 1966, March the 16th. And last week, we told you of the plans for Gemini 8, a two-manned spacecraft, with Dave Scott as the pilot. Dave Scott as the EVA person, and Neil Armstrong as the commander. And we told them of the plan. Dave Scott spoke to the Voice of America about his role as expected on the mission.
We maneuver with a handheld maneuvering unit, and we sort of float or soar. We for a long tether rail or hold on to handrails, which you might consider hand-over-hand walking. We have basically 5 major pieces of equipment, one of which is the chest pack, which contains an emergency oxygen supply and a cooling system. Another is a backpack, which contains a normal oxygen supply and propellant for the handheld maneuvering unit, which I would consider our third piece of equipment, and it's very similar to the one that Ed White used.
Meanwhile, 60 years ago, 2 astronauts were touring Australia and New Zealand.
Meanwhile, astronauts from previous Gemini flights were making news on the other side of the world. Correspondent Edward Conley reports from Australia.
Astronauts Walter Schirra and Frank Borman dropped in on Australia this week to say hello.
Astronauts Walter Schirra and Frank Borman dropped in on Australia this week to say hello in person to the many people who have guided them and cheered them on their space flights. In Perth, Adelaide, and Melbourne, the Space Rendezvous pilots were treated to warm welcomes. At the Australian space tracking stations at Carnarvon and Woomera, scientists and technicians got first-hand reports on the space flights they guided from the men.
A detailed report on the New Zealand part of the tour is on the Space Show website, including photographs. That's at space.southernfm.com.au. Then look for the Precursor audio link. Well, things were ready for the launch, and so this week we'll follow the mission, which, a spoiler alert, very nearly turned out to be a fatal mission. It was launched on 1966, March the 16th, 60 years ago next week. Ahead of the launch, this report from the NZBC.
Meanwhile, at Cape Kennedy, America's Gemini 8 spacecraft is being prepared for launching early Wednesday morning, New Zealand time. The flight will help determine if there is any life form in outer space. During a 2.5-hour period outside the spacecraft, Major Scott will put a sterile patch on the nose of an unmanned Agena target rocket with which Gemini 8 plans to rendezvous. The idea is that any microorganisms will be trapped on the patch. The Agena will continue to orbit the Earth until another rendezvous by Gemini 10 later this year, when an attempt will be made to retrieve the patch.
Then came a postponement.
The news read by Peter Sinclair. The rendezvous and spacewalk flight of the Gemini 8 astronauts has been postponed for 24 hours until Thursday New Zealand time. The cause is leaks discovered in an Atlas rocket and in a spacesuit circuit of the craft. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration at Cape Kennedy says the trouble was discovered during checks before the final countdown. The rocket is to launch an Agena satellite into space as a target for the astronauts to chase and rendezvous with. Technicians are expected to have all faults corrected in time for the deferred launching at 3 o'clock on Thursday morning, New Zealand time.
Next day, the Atlas Agena D launched, followed by the Gemini Titan.
2, 1, 0. We have ignition. A big second, and we are liftoff. 3 seconds. It's lifting off from Australia. Here across the band comes the roar of those tremendous engines. Roll program in the
As the two spacecraft approached each other, the Voice of America began a live broadcast commentary.
This is the Voice of America broadcasting from Washington with live coverage of the Gemini 8 space rendezvous.
And this is Brett Turner in Houston, Texas, along with Ed Hickey to bring you a description of the rendezvous maneuvers, which are about to begin in 10 minutes from now, the terminal phase of the rendezvous of the spacecraft Gemini 8 with its Agena target vehicle now orbiting nearby. This will take place during the next 30 or 40 minutes, and within the hour, within about 1 hour from now, the Gemini 8 spacecraft should have rendezvoused and docked or connected with the Agena in orbit. This is a vital maneuver necessary for future lunar orbital missions to help man get to the moon and back. We'll have more later. Now, back to Washington.
The Gemini 8 spacecraft is 4 hours and 50 minutes in flight, beginning its fourth revolution. It will be passing over Ecuador, Peru, and Brazil in the next 10 minutes, and then at 5 hours in flight heading out over the South Atlantic Ocean. From the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston, Texas, and from the Gemini News Center here in Washington, the Voice of America is bringing you live coverage of the flight of Gemini 8. Today, a rendezvous and docking, or connecting up, with an Agena rocket.
Now, Neil Armstrong flew Gemini 8 ever closer to the Agena rocket, then flew beside it. Some 6.5 hours after liftoff came the news that we had been waiting for.
Roger, stand by for a couple minutes, yes. See they docked? Negative, he is not docked yet. Okay, Gemini 8, we have nailed solid. You're looking good on the ground. Go ahead and dock. Okay, we have a rigid light, getting stop rigid now. Okay, Gemini 8, it looks good here from the ground. We're showing tone rigid. Everything looks good from the docking.
With the mission progressing successfully, the Voice of America ended its broadcast.
So that concludes this portion of our coverage of GT8. The docking is successful. This is Frank X. Titus.
In New Zealand, the NZBC reported the success.
Here is the news, read by Hewitt Humphrey. Just before 10 minutes past 11 this morning, 2 American astronauts piloted their Gemini 8 capsule into the first space link-up ever achieved by man. It marked a vital step towards a landing on the moon. And what the astronaut Neil Armstrong described as like threading a needle in space, he slid the nose of Gemini 8 into a docking collar on an unmanned Agena satellite, using small thruster rockets for the maneuver. Armstrong reported it was a real smoothie. Both the Agena and Gemini 8 were put into closely matching orbits about 100 minutes apart early this morning. Thruster units were used for the final adjustments. And when Gemini was 25 miles from its target, the astronauts again applied power to make a rendezvous. The two vehicles will now remain locked in space for a number of orbits. Soon after midnight, New Zealand time tonight, the astronaut David Scott will leave Gemini 8 and expose a sterile patch on the outside of the Agena. It will be left exposed while the Agena continues in orbit after Gemini 8 returns to Earth. Later this year, another Gemini mission will inspect the plate to see if it picks up any traces of microscopic life in space. Scott will remain outside Gemini for about 2.5 hours.
Soon after that report, the Voice of America went live with the news that Gemini 8 was tumbling in space and would be making an emergency landing. I missed the beginning of this unscheduled broadcast.
About 3 feet high, it is a bit choppy, and all the other astronauts have concluded that the Gemini spacecraft may be a wonderful spaceship, but it's not a very good boat. That's right.
Regan, our colleague John Hammersmith of NASA at this point, for any comments he might have of where we stand now. Landing sequence, the rest of the fire sequence, of course, the rockets have been fired some minutes ago. Yes, they're waiting now until they drop down into this area to a suitable altitude where they can begin to guide their spacecraft. As I believe Rhett said, this is about 20 minutes from retro fire time, and that's about 10 more minutes to go before they can begin to do this.
I had one other thing here, too, I thought was interesting to mention. In looking at the map, you can determine why this particular path was chosen for re-entry within the time schedule allowed. The retro rockets were fired while the spacecraft was in voice contact with tracking stations, in this case, Kano, Nigeria. And it will be out of touch with tracking stations until it hits the very crucial atmosphere re-entry point, and by then, hopefully, according to Mr. Haney, as he told us too, it should be within contact of the coastal Century Quebec tracking ship east of Okinawa and south of Japan also.
A question, if I may, here to John Hammersmith. The spacecraft, once it hits the water, of course, still has a radio transmitter, does it not? But it probably has very little distance.
Yes, this is what has, I think, has been at the root of some of the communication problems we've had in our primary area even. They're communicating fine with the aircraft that are overhead, but we back here in the States who are starving for some good news don't hear a thing.
88.3 Southern FM.
Where you're listening to the Space Show. And we're looking back 60 years to the nearly disastrous flight of Gemini 8. Well, the Voice of America continued its coverage for the next few hours. At times, shortwave reception was poor. So poor, in fact, I can't inflict it on you, dear listener. Then the news that Gemini 8 had splashed down.
Rescue 1, which is a C-54, has the spacecraft in sight. It is overhead, and the destroyer Mason right now is approximately 90 miles from that point.
Obviously, the C-54 is in communication with the Mission Control Center, or at least they...
Now how one advises, they have the spacecraft in sight, and it has splashed down. It's on the water.
And I'll bet a big cheer goes up in Mission Control Center.
I just heard it. I just heard it.
Shall we? They're safely on the water. The spacecraft has returned to Earth. Astronauts Armstrong and Scott have successfully leaved the atmosphere over Africa and Asia and splashed down in the Pacific just south of Japan and east of Okinawa. They're in sight of one of the rescue aircraft, and we assume that this will be the one containing para-rescue divers and parachutists to assist them safely.
With reception from the Voice of America rapidly deteriorating, I returned to the NZBC.
Here is the news, read by Bill Toft. Gemini 8's aborted flight into space ended 10 minutes ago. The capsule had developed a fault soon after it completed a successful docking maneuver with an Agena capsule this morning. The trouble arose in Gemini's main thruster rocket. The capsule was ordered to make an emergency return to Earth, and astronauts Neil Armstrong and David Scott have landed in the Pacific near Okinawa. Planes are overhead, and Gemini 8 is reported to be riding safely in the sea. An American destroyer is heading to the spot to recover them. But it will take several hours to reach the splashdown area, and the astronauts will probably be in the water at least 3 hours before they're picked up. The sea is relatively calm, and conditions are perfect. A military transport aircraft has flown from Japan to the scene, and other planes with para-rescue men are on their way. Associated Press says the remote area was chosen as the best landing zone available. At the time the trouble developed, Gemini 8 was traveling over areas where large contingents of recovery forces were not available. United Press says this is by far the greatest emergency ever to be encountered by an American spacecraft in flight. The early termination of the flight deprived Scott of his planned walk around the world in space, which he was to begin tomorrow morning. But soon after 11 o'clock this morning, the astronauts achieved the main purpose of the mission when Armstrong slid the nose of Gemini 8 into a docking collar on the unmanned Agena. This was a vital step toward a landing on the moon. It's not known whether the trouble began in the Agena rocket or in the Gemini spacecraft itself, but it is known that one thruster in the spacecraft stuck in the on position, and suddenly the two joined spacecraft began to tumble. Armstrong decided to back the Gemini away.
On medium wave, the ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Commission, punched through an electrical storm over the Tasman. This is how I recorded it in New Zealand.
After a successful link-up operation, an anxious waiting period, and a safe splashdown and rescue with the astronauts aboard ship on their way to Okinawa.
Gemini 8 is safely down in the Pacific. Astronauts Armstrong and Scott are being taken to Okinawa. This only a few hours before Scott should have been setting the record for a walk in space. A disappointment and a serious one, but not the disaster it looked like being at one time during the night. At 11:30 yesterday evening, I was able to report the first ever docking, linking up of two vehicles in space. Everything concerned with this Gemini 8 shot and its Agena target vehicle had gone precisely according to plan. It was so perfect that it was almost dull. Then, an hour later, television networks across the country suddenly broke into their programs to announce a crisis. Gemini and Agena, linked together 185 miles above the Earth, had developed an uncontrollable roll as much as 36 degrees per second. Emergency measures were used. The vehicles separated. Gemini's re-entry thrusters were fired to correct the fault, quickly traced to a jammed valve in one of the spaceship's main thrusters. But moments later came the expected order, in line with the primary rule of the American space effort, that the safety of the astronauts comes first. The flight was to be terminated. It was already dark in the main Atlantic recovery area. A spot in the Pacific was chosen instead, still daylight there, and with space agency ships and aircraft in fairly easy reach. But not the constant communications to which all concerned have become accustomed. We did hear a voice from space report that all 4 retro rockets had fired according to plan. Then nothing. Nothing for more than half an hour. Till this message came through from Mission Control at Houston. I did verify they have in sight. I say again, Rescue 1, which is the C-54. Spacecraft inside. Right now at the first 90 miles from that point. They have the spacecraft in sight, and it has splashed down. It's on the water.
Oh, that was the word we were waiting for, that we've been holding our breaths for now for 3 hours and a half.
But now we have a report from the aircraft.
They say that the flotation position of the spacecraft appears quite normal, upright and normal. We're expecting momentarily to get word from that aircraft that the swimmers have deployed. They then will attach the flotation collar. This is Gemini Control, Houston.
The second voice there was that of Walter Cronkite, chief commentator for CBS television, and he reflected a nationwide relief. Only some time later, the experts got around to counting the re-entry among the many pluses of this remarkable flight. It was perhaps the most accurate ever made, within a mile or so of the planned spot, and within sight of the pilot of a rescue plane already waiting for it. The inquest will go on for months. Just now, all that really matters is that that word doesn't have to be used in its grimmest sense.
The NZBC carried this report from a reporter in the United States.
Attention to the Gemini 8 spaceflight progress during the day. They heard in the news that astronauts Armstrong and Scott had succeeded in docking their capsule with the unmanned Agena target vehicle, and only just settled down to watch or listen to their favorite programs, when suddenly radio and television broadcasts were interrupted with bulletins that trouble had developed. Command pilot Armstrong reported violent gyrations and difficulty in controlling his spacecraft. He managed to dislodge the capsule from the Agena target vehicle. A little later, he regained some measure of stability. Gemini Control at the Space Center in Houston, Texas, announced tersely that it had ordered the mission ended. There was to be an emergency splashdown way out from the primary rescue areas, some 500 miles east of Okinawa. Millions of Americans sat glued to their sets. Bit by bit, information was released. A successful landing depended on many factors. The weather conditions were fortunately favorable. There were rescue planes in the splashdown vicinity. Ships in the area were alerted. But the first cheers came when Armstrong reported from space to the Space Center in Houston that his retro rockets had fired properly. Tension slackened a little, but the worry was not over
until the by now well-known voice from Houston announced,
Gemini Control Houston here. We've just had a report relayed through Hawaii that the swimmers in the water have been in voice contact with the crew. The crew reports all aboard is fine. I say again, the crew reports their condition is okay.
But right up to this moment, space officials do not know what caused the trouble. Reports from Houston indicate that there was near panic at the Space Center at one point. A reporter overheard an official say, "We may lose the whole ball of wax." But later, officials were silent. And for the first time, a tape-recorded conversation with the Gemini crew was withheld from the press. It therefore appears that whatever the trouble was, it was quite serious.
Peter Schroeder reported from New York.
And of course, there were congratulatory messages, including one from New Zealand.
The New Zealand Prime Minister has sent a message to President Johnson expressing the country's congratulations on the historic docking of two vehicles in space. Mr. Holyoake said the visit this week of astronauts Schirra and Borman gave New Zealanders all the more reason to hail the outstanding success of the mission.
And both Neil Armstrong and Dave Scott, as you've heard, landed safely, and they both went on to walk on the moon. That's Dave Scott and Neil Armstrong. And of course, if you ask some young people who was the first astronaut, they often answer, Neil Armstrong, when they'll be totally wrong. So I'm Andrew Rennie. Big thank you to Richard. And this is The Space Show.